time.
Let's start the meeting. You started recording, great. Okay, so I am calling to order this July 16th meeting of the Ranked Choice Voting Ad Hoc Committee. It's 6:09. We have Barbara, Owen, Sarah, Tom, and Jeff Silvestro from LHS is joining us, which means that we do have a quorum, so that's fancy. We are conducting this meeting via Zoom under the COVID-19 restrictions that have been in place. So a recording of this is being made. It's also open to the public, which we know works because we did have a public guest once last meeting. That was great. I don't know if I'm supposed to say anything else about that, but I think that probably covers it. So we'll open, I mean, Jeff here is gonna have is part of our agenda for sure. So I think public speak, you know, there's no one else here from Easthampton, so we'll skip over that. The minutes, which are detailed and awesome, we have just dealt with a slight issue of distribution, so we're going to skip over approving those from our last meeting until next meeting, just so that those of us who haven't had a chance to read over them do. And so that brings us to the secretary position and rotation for the moment. So we don't have a permanent secretary, and we were doing a rotation based on names, which I think would put us on Tom for this week, if we want to keep following that. If someone wants to be a permanent secretary, we can also do that, which would be maybe a little easier, or we can just keep rotating. What do you guys think?
Well, I still don't think we have any volunteers. So,
me.
Wait, if we're going alphabetically, I think it does fall to Barb this time.
Oh no, I already did mine.
Oh, right. All right. Whatever.
We agreed to skip over Barb because she'd already done it.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Out
And we're skipping over you because you're chair.
Meeting.
And Chris isn't here, so yep, P is.
Well, we can get Chris next time.
Yeah. And I mean, if you want to swap with Owen, like I don't have a problem swapping here.
I'm all good. I'll do it.
All right.
Sure. Get up a Word doc. Yeah, okay. I mean, gotta do it.
All right. So we have Tom Peake being the acting secretary for this meeting. He's going to take minutes. And if Chris is here or Barbara Craig is here next meeting, they would be next in line to do that under our system. If not, we'll pick someone else. Okay, so moving on to the good stuff. Before we have Jeff talk, and we can I think we can combine the next two on this, because I did want to go over, I was able to get Jeff a bunch of questions that he addressed. See this? Okay. So if I want to screen share these, I go to share screen and preview. Oh, that's the one there. Okay. So, can people see that?
Yep. Yes.
Good.
Yes.
So, this was a grouping of questions, and I only did one and a half little bits of back and forth with Jeff about this, but based on our last meeting, which was long but was really productive in terms of going over all of the settings that are going to go into our profile, and some of which are going to have to be spelled out in our ordinance, and already kind of are to some degree in some of our existing template language there. So I think the way that I want to handle this, if it's cool with Jeff and with everybody else, is we can kind of go down the line of these questions, and then if we have, and Jeff can either sort of go into more detail if necessary, if anyone feels like that's necessary, and we can kind of do the same thing we did last time, which is generate a list of things that we need to know, that we need to figure out before we're comfortable coming to a decision about this stuff. So I'm just going to start at the top, which was what's the process for resolving write-in votes, because we had that had come up in our talk about the settings. So, and Jeff's answer here was same as with regular ballots, either using adjudication or manual resolution in RTR. So I think that this question of resolving write-in votes came from one of the particular questions, which was, I'm just pulling up the user's guide here. And this was page 50 something. So I hope everyone saw that Jeff sent over the updated user's guide, which is, the text is almost identical. It has the update for that assign skipped rankings to the set of exhausted ballots option that the previous manual didn't have. So, I was previewing this so it didn't come up. User's guide. I know you guys can't see the user's guide on here, but I'm just.
So, Dan, I think where that came from was one of the checkbox options to exclude unresolved write-ins.
Yes.
And essentially what that means, if you check it, is any write-in that hasn't been resolved is going to be counted as a blank, essentially.
Okay.
Can I just ask,
Yeah.
what does it mean for something to be resolved here?
I was just going to ask that.
Okay, so when you have a write-in vote that's cast, the machine doesn't know the name that you wrote in, the person's name. It only sees that the oval was filled in and that you made the choice to vote a write-in vote. To resolve it is to go back and actually look at the ballot physically, go into the software, put in the person's name, the candidate's name that was written in, and assign a vote from a write-in vote to that candidate. So generally, what you do is someone who has a legitimate campaign, who has X number of votes, becomes a viable write-in candidate. You accumulate all their votes and you assign them their number of votes. Anybody from, Howard Stern to Donald Duck or whoever that is just a fictitious name that was put in would either get put into a single bucket of other. For this purpose, you wouldn't want to do that because it would screw up your math. You would probably just exclude those votes and keep them as unresolved.
I like how in your example Howard Stern is fictional, but
yeah, I know. Nowadays, probably not.
So unresolved is kind of like the all others, all
Yes.
that
Yep.
just get one or
So-
two. Okay.
Yeah, right now what you used to do is just lumping all of those into an all others vote category. They don't really count for anything. We have to account for them so our checks and balances match, but they're not a real viable candidate.
right. Owen?
I think you may have just answered this. So I might just make sure I'm understanding the language, though, and I think we talked about this before. But if so, basically the write-in slot or the write-in line has its own bubble. So the way it initially comes up on the machine is all of the registered candidates, and then essentially the write-ins, right? Mm-hmm. And if that tally for all of the cumulative write-ins is basically below the threshold to even make it if they were basically last, it doesn't even matter. They just get thrown out, right?
Yeah, so I think that was something I said in our first meeting was instead of going through the process and resolving the write-ins, because it is kind of tedious, I would actually run the program itself and see if the write-ins as a whole get knocked off in the first round. If they do, then you don't even have enough write-ins for a single write-in candidate to go beyond that first round. So again, and that's in my mind, it wouldn't even be worth going through the process of resolving them at that point.
Right. So basically at the polls, the write-ins ballots would be grouped together, but you wouldn't really do anything else with them. You'd just kind of put them in a bucket.
Yeah. So, I mean, right now it happens, and Barbara can correct me if the process in Easthampton is different. The poll workers would actually transpose the names and hand tally all the write-ins at the polls.
Correct.
They could still do that, but for this software to run the whole ranked choice voting program, we would have to enter that into the software so it knows how to interpret those write-in votes.
Right.
So the poll workers could still follow their normal process. But I think as far as doing the data entry into the software, we would want to run the program as is to see if it was even worth our time. And then if it was, then we would just go back and do it at that point.
And in terms of all that, you could really actually do it where you run it to see if the write-ins, if they were all for one candidate, could win, right? It wouldn't even need to be if they got knocked out in the first round. Like, if there were,
Yes.
if the write-ins don't have, even if they were all for one person can't win, then
Well, that's what I'm saying.
it doesn't really matter who they're for.
Well,
Yeah,
but I
that's-
think that you have to tally them you have to do that, as far as I know, according to elections. I mean, people are, if they want to know who the write-ins were, they need to know.
But you don't need to tally them for the purposes of ranking.
No, but at the polls, like, we won't do the ranking. I mean, I won't have that at the polls, so they're still going to have to go ahead and do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure, but they have to do that right now. I'm just wondering about how much extra work this adds. And, if the write-ins as a block are not a candidate that can win, then
Right.
That's correct.
for the purpose of ranking, it doesn't really matter. The only case that it would is if there was a possibility that the write-ins could actually win, and then you have to figure out, are these all for the same person? Or kind of reminds me of that whole state Senate thing from 2018.
Tom, we're kind of saying the same thing. The reason I said first round is because generally that's when the knockout happens in the examples I've seen. But yes, you're right. If you went beyond that, still to the third or fourth round, and they didn't have enough to get past that, then you would know collectively the whole group doesn't. So there's no way one candidate would.
Okay. Owen.
So for the purpose of the ordinance, are we assuming that process is implicit, or do we have to write that in the language in terms of handling write-ins?
I suggest that we don't need to specifically write that in the ordinance because we already handle write-ins. We already have to resolve write-ins, for our current elections. I think what does go in the ordinance is this profile setting that's exclude unresolved write-ins, potentially in the ordinance, which I think part of what we were trying to determine with these profile settings is, are they something that affects the result of the election or not? And if they are, they absolutely need to be in the ordinance. If they're not, then they might be able to be excluded from the ordinance for the purposes of flexibility.
Could there be a better way of saying that so it's more understandable what it means, like resolved and unresolved? I don't know.
Sure, yeah, we could work on coming up with our own.
We can certainly either define that in the ordinance, or we can paraphrase it to something that certainly explains it more than just saying unresolved write-ins.
It's something we've had to get
actually, because it's not super clear.
It's something we've had to get used to, is using the terminology, for lack of a better word, that the software developers who created this programming came up with, and it does not always match what we generally use in elections.
Right. So we had tentatively decided on saying, yes, we do want to exclude unresolved write-ins. And I think based on what we've just talked about, that is in fact what we want to be doing, which is basically the Howard Sterns and Mickey Mouses we do not resolve those to legitimate candidates, and instead they are kind of just excluded but accounted for by being excluded. Is everyone pretty much in agreement on that?
Just to respond quickly to Owen's question, this might be an area where I would actually recommend we explicitly write out what we should do in the ordinance, because like we were talking about last time, one of the big purposes of the ordinance is to make it so that in the course of an election there are no surprises, right? And there's no ambiguity. So if there's a case where somebody mounts a kind of credible write-in campaign for an office, then how exactly the city clerk's office should handle those write-in votes, I think is that shouldn't be something that the clerk's office has to decide, at the minute. It should be very clear for the write-in candidate and for all the other candidates exactly how that's going to go, so that there's no confusion that could startle somebody in the last minute.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna keep moving down this list.
Dan, just before you do, keep in mind all these settings we're talking about are, when we're building our profile for how we're going to run the ranking and get our results out, there's nothing in here saying that you can only create one profile. So you could actually create a preliminary profile that has certain settings, and then you could run, save another profile called official, which actually runs everything with the unresolved write-ins excluded. You have the ability to set multiple profiles.
I see.
So if you wanted to set one to do a first pass to see if write-ins were even going to be something you needed to concern yourself with, you can create a special profile just for that.
But one profile has to be the official, this is the result profile, I imagine.
Yes, I would. Yeah.
Okay. I feel comfortable about the fact that I think what we're deciding is on that official final profile. If there are other profiles that are helpful in getting there, I don't think that needs to be written into the ordinance. I think I think that's the kind of flexibility that the software gives us, and that, if we need to say something in the ordinance about that, that's fine. But I think that in terms of really what this is about getting us to the winner, and what that profile looks like. But I didn't even realize that, and that's important for us to know, because I think process-wise that could in fact make it a lot easier. So
and that's why I wanted to bring it up. So obviously what you're writing is the official stuff, but just so you know, you're not limited.
That's cool, and I think that comes into play like with the pause after round setting, where it's like if this was set up in an auditorium or a live stream or something, and we wanted it to go round by round and have those pauses, we could have a display profile with that selected, so that it was sort of more real time. So that's cool. So is there any significance to the continuing ballots first round option for the votes to include in threshold calculation setting for a single winner IRV election, right? So we had some question as to whether this was relevant, and I just need to get my brain back on board with where we are here. So continuing ballots first round. So this was the votes to include in threshold calculation was continuing ballots per round or continuing ballots first round. And what we had decided that continuing ballots per round made more logical sense to our understanding of it, which was as rounds proceed and some ballots are exhausted, if you're doing a threshold calculation, which, we're not doing multi-winner yet at this point, does, you know, so I think that was the idea, is this a moot point if we're not doing multi-winner? And the answer here was continuing balance first round keeps the threshold immutable across all rounds. If not, the threshold is recalculated after every round, based only on the non-exhausted ballots, which makes sense. But I think the committee's confusion was, in a non-multi-winner race, does this idea of a threshold even matter?
But it does if exhausted ballots don't change the threshold.
It does
Right.
if exhausted ballots don't change the threshold.
Because if there was a lot of people who exhausted their ballots, it could be that there isn't a candidate who can meet that threshold, right?
As in, if you're counting all of the exhausted ballots as the total, then you might not have a majority.
Yes. Right? Am I thinking about this the right way?
I think so. Jeff, does that make? Are you able to follow that? Are you? Because in a single winner, we're just eliminating one at a time, whoever is the fewest, right? So we're not really doing a threshold calculation. You know, and this sort of ties in with that declare winners by threshold option, which again, we had sort of decided, okay, we're doing single winner, so we don't really need to worry about threshold. We're simply eliminating candidates either in batches or one by one based on the bottom until we you know, come up with a winner. So
Sorry, I'm just running the program over here to see if I can visually see what the difference is.
oh, that's great. Awesome.
It doesn't seem, again, with a single winner contest, it doesn't seem to make a difference.
That was our gut feeling, and we kind of just wanted to confirm that we were totally understanding exactly how thresholds came into play with a single winner race. So does anyone else on the committee need more digging into this particular one, or are we comfortable with having it be continuing ballots per round, which we talked about considerably last meeting, and then the not setting declare winners by threshold for these single winner?
I think that's what we thought made sense.
Yeah, but I know
that makes sense.
we wanted to confirm that this wasn't going to actually affect the outcome of a single winner race at all.
And,
Yeah, I mean,
and it wouldn't, because theoretically you can just keep eliminating until there's only one person left.
Exactly.
that's right.
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 So, because, you know, in a multi-winner race, the threshold matters more, but a single winner race, like, you know, it'll conclude. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
In a multi-winner race, if you eliminate until you have X number of people left, you may get a different result than if you assign people to being elected by doing thresholds, because the votes will transfer in a different order potentially. Okay, great. Moving on. Are we understanding the use previous tie-break decision option correctly? When would you need to run the tabulation more than once? So this answer here was pretty much in line with what we thought, mostly for testing and LNA, but I'm not sure what LNA is.
Logic and accuracy. So that's your pre-election testing to make sure everything's functioning correctly.
Okay, great. If you define the order for tie resolution prior to the election, when you run the tabulation multiple times, it will remember the option. Some of our customers run tabulation multiple times during and after election day as more ballots come into the system. And by it will remember the option, I think what you mean there is it will remember the results of the tie break that's entered, right?
Yes.
So like if you flip a coin and you say, oh, it came up heads, this person is out, it will remember that the next time you rerun it.
Let me just open that up real quick.
Okay. And as a committee, we had thought this is something that we do want to, for our official profile, we do want to say, yes, we do want it to remember these, because if we do have to do a tie break, we don't want to have to do the tie break again or record it somewhere else outside of the software when the software just says, you know, it can remember it.
Fortunately, I don't have a large enough data set to create multiple tiebreak scenarios. In the manual setting I have to break a tie, it just shows the tied candidates, and you pick the one that's going to be eliminated. So I'm honestly not sure how that would carry over into future decisions. I would have to test that to see.
If you ran it again after selecting that person with that setting picked, does it even pop up and say there's still a tie, pick one? Or does it just remember and...
it remembers that you selected that candidate as the candidate to be eliminated.
Okay. So I think that's all that setting does, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you don't have that, then it's going to say, hey, we have a tie, you have to tie break it again.
No, you're correct. That's exactly what it is.
Which it seems very unlikely you would want that unchecked, because I don't know. I have flexibility, but does any other committee member have a follow-up on this that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, just one thing, and it's probably a stupid question, but here we go. You know, they said that in your response, Jeff, you said that some of our customers run tabulations multiple times during and after Election Day as more ballots come into the system. If more ballots were to come into the system that would change that tie, then it wouldn't be an issue, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think what they're alluding to there, especially when they're talking about testing an LNA, is turning that off allows you to run your test multiple times to see how making different choices changes the results. So again, the point of LNA is to make sure that the ballots are being read and the program is reading them correctly. So if you wanted to create multiple test scenarios to make sure that every possible scenario was working correctly, that's how you would do that. Okay. As far as more ballots coming into the system, that could be anything from ballots that were misplaced that were suddenly discovered after the fact, absentee ballots that were postmarked correctly but never got to the polling place and needed to be, added into the totals. It's not frequent, and I don't think it applies necessarily as much to Massachusetts, but there are scenarios where ballots would have to be added after the fact.
Am I correct in assuming that the ordinance is not really going to affect, not necessarily not going to affect, but this particular setting could be useful in different ways, in testing than perhaps on Election Day. And I don't think that if we choose one setting to encode in the ordinance, it necessarily prevents the clerk's office from using a more helpful testing scenario before.
No, and we can be explicit in the ordinance that when we're talking about these things, that this applies to the official tabulation profile and that other profiles might be used for LNA. Yeah, and I think that's a good idea to do that. All right, I'm gonna move on. Our next, what is an unresolved write-in? We addressed this already. Write-in position that was not resolved to a qualified write-in candidate or was rejected. So I think I'm gonna skip over this one because I think we have pretty good clarity on that process at this point. The assigned skipped rankings to the set of exhausted ballots option wasn't covered. We do have the new manual, and we have. So I'm going to actually table that. We're going to come back to that at the end of this because it's a slightly longer discussion. Can we differentiate between one or more than one consecutive? No. What is the significance? So let's jump past that one. What's the significance of use first round suspension option? So the equivalent of having a round 0 before moving ranks up. So we were all a little bit confused about this one. And is it just in terms of, is that just presentational? Or does this affect the count somehow? We thought that this was like just the way that the data is presented, where this round 0 is like sort of just I don't know. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
You're thinking on the right lines, and
okay.
I don't know necessarily how to present that either. But it really is just how you're showing. I mean, what you were saying with the presentation in the auditorium.
Yeah.
Even if you pause after each round, as soon as you hit go, it's going to immediately create data. I guess it could present a winner initially in the first round.
Right.
So
I see. So it might go ahead and eliminate somebody
immediately.
Right away.
Yeah. So it's more about how you're presenting to the data itself to the people.
So this would just allow people to see like a list of the candidates initially?
I want to say, here, let me use.
Oh, and I did see your hand, so I got you next.
Yeah, so really all it does is it lists out the candidate and it shows you all the other columns as far as threshold, non-transferable, how many blanks, exhausted, surplus, suspended, surplus, transfer, remainder. So it just lines everything up with a status, and then after that pause, it goes into round 1, and that round 1 is where you start seeing the vote totals.
And that would conceivably, pardon me, that would allow whoever is giving this presentation to explain some of these things, I guess.
Yeah.
Thresholds and all that.
Yeah, it's like I said, instead of just hitting tabulate and all of a sudden numbers are populating and things are turning green and you have things happening immediately, you have that ability to just kind of present it, explain it before you actually tabulate and start showing numbers.
Owen?
I think Sarah and I had the same question. I mean, my understanding from my is that this kind of gives you the raw data before anything happens, in case people want to have an understanding of what everything looked like from at the start. I think we have. So, is that fair to say?
Yeah, I want to see. Give me 1 second. So I'll do this without moving around too much.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the screen is. So as soon as we select tabulate, by choosing that setting, I now have a list of everything that's going to appear.
Oh, but it doesn't even have any votes.
Yeah, it's
No,
just
that's the
This
first
is round
one.
0.
Oh,
This is round 0.
Okay.
So then when I hit tabulate, because I have it set to pause between rounds, it's going to give me everything in the first round.
I see.
And stop. Then I can go and do my second round. Now we see write-ins have been eliminated. And we go to the third round, and we see those 2.
I see. And without that setting, it's just going to go right into round 1.
Correct.
Got it.
Can I just say it's pretty exciting actually watching that?
Yeah, for
Yeah, we should set up a different time where I can kind of do a more formal screen share.
Yeah.
We, as a practice, keep all of our programming computers offline, so it's a little bit hard to do that. But we have one terminal that we specifically use just for demonstration purposes that we could definitely set up and get something on for you guys.
Cool. So I think that answers our question about that particular setting.
And I think that if we're going sort of the spirit of what we were discussing last time, since that's not something that can potentially change the outcome of an election, that's probably something that the ordinance shouldn't really touch, right? Because it could be that a future city clerk's office might want to do it one way or another for whatever presentational purposes.
Yep.
The only parameters we should really be specifying are the ones that could actually alter the outcome of the election.
Yep. This kind of falls in the pause after round category where it's doesn't. Okay, let's talk about skipped rank for a second. Oh, look, it's Chris.
Hey, I've been here a little while. I'm sorry I'm late, everyone. I was sitting there like a putz waiting for the meeting to start in the wrong agenda link.
No. Oops. Well, welcome.
Owen tipped me off, so.
You dodged the secretary bullet, but you're gonna do it next time.
What was it my day today too?
It was gonna be.
Okay.
How convenient.
So Chris, you owe me one.
Oh, thanks, Tom.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about skipped rankings. So the background on this, and we talked about it a little bit last weekend or last meeting, was Maine, which differentiates between a single skipped rank and multiple consecutive skipped rankings. Where basically Maine statute says a single skipped ranking is ignored and multiple skipped rankings are exhausted. And, you know, we don't need to rehash the conversation from last meeting because we kind of all talked about the rationale for that. And I think it sounded like people were kind of liked the rationale for that, which is why we were digging into this more. But it sounds like at the moment, the software, like it's one or the other. It's either skipped rankings are exhausted or they're not as a total. And I'm just wondering, Jeff, if you had any further contact with the developers, and just like how the situation is playing out in regards to Maine at the moment.
Again, we don't support any of these elections in Maine, so it's not really something that we've run into. Every other community.
ICPs are not being used anywhere in Maine?
No, they are not.
Oh, wow.
The other,
Yep.
What, Barbara, what was that?
it's the other company,
Oh,
Yes.
Yep.
okay.
So what we have generally seen with customers, and again, this doesn't need to apply. We can talk about a software change if it's something that you're kind of steadfast on going that direction. We can actually notify the voter that this happened at the tabulator. So the ballot goes in, the machine will actually tell the voter that they have consecutive skipped ranks. And then the voter can decide if they want to cast that ballot as is, knowing that it would be exhausted, or they can return that ballot, spoil it, and vote a new one to be inserted and counted the way that they desire it to be counted.
That's fantastic. I mean that kind of, in my mind, makes the problem moot because voters will have a chance to be educated
right there at the polls. Hey,
Except
for mail.
Your absentee ballots, your mail-in ballots are going to be the only ones obviously affected. But generally, that's how the customers we've dealt with, I'll reference Cambridge like I did last time. Pretty much any anomaly on a ballot in Cambridge is rejected by the tabulator. so that the voter can re-vote correctly and the ballot can be counted. That's a byproduct of having 15 ranks next to each candidate's name. The ballot gets very confusing. People make a lot of mistakes.
Right.
So we want to make sure that the voter's notified before that ballot's processed.
Right. I don't know if you, I mean, I know that you're not Dominion voting system, like, and that you're a rep and you're your own company, but I don't know if there's any, or if any of the other committee members know this, but like, is there not a plan for them to support Maine in this? I mean, it seems like something that would be not terribly difficult to add to the software, and being a statewide thing there, it seems like a big customer base. I'm just a little baffled by it, honestly.
The way that development works is by opportunity. So if we know that Maine is going to become an opportunity and it's something that we want to aggressively pursue, then we would put a ticket in and they would make the software adjustment and we would be able to go into Maine and try and get certified. Where we don't have that option because Maine went with a long-term lease contract, it just got, set aside.
I see.
So I'll use Cambridge again. Cambridge was an available opportunity. We knew we had a good shot at it. We put a plan together. We built everything that we needed to build based on their proportional representation, and we adjusted the software accordingly. So it's kind of, development is more reactionary than proactive.
Got it. Well, and that kind of answers my question. The fact that they had a long-term lease in there means that it's not an immediate, like, hey, we have to add this in so it works with the machines. It's like a, we'll make.
I'm constantly putting in software development requests. It's the nature of things.
Yeah. So, what do you guys do? Are there any other thoughts on the committee about this?
I mean, so for me, the number one most important thing has been resolved by, as long as the machine can just say, okay, that ballot that you filled out isn't correct, or is that ballot's going to be rejected, then I'm because that was my one concern, is that someone accidentally skipped a rank.
But the problem here is COVID, really. I mean, it's really changed the calculus on mail-in. I mean, enormously.
You're totally right. I mean, we have no idea where we're going to be 2021.
No, so it's not necessarily this year, but I'm just thinking more long term. If mail-in voting is going to, I mean, I think there's a reasonable possibility that mail-in voting might be something that's here to stay in some reasonably large capacity. I mean, we're looking at a general election that might have more mail-in votes than in-person votes, probably for the first time in history. And I don't think there's necessary, I mean, even without virus restrictions in place, there's some states that have gone entirely to mail-in voting. Like Washington and some other places. So
you have to remember, though, that this is a local election. This isn't a state election. So things that may be allowed as a state election right now, unless it's all going to be by absentee ballot, I think, it's something to keep in mind. But
a lot of the laws that were just enacted and signed by the governor actually expire on the 31st of December unless the emergency order is extended beyond that. So Barbara's exactly right. A lot of what we're going to see in the next two elections, there may not be any of that going forward after this year.
Oh, I totally recognize that. And I'm not speaking specifically to the existing laws or even the existing pandemic. I'm more thinking a little bit more long term in terms of if it can happen now in this situation, it can happen again. And do we want a situation where we have more exhausted ballots because it skipped ranks, and people don't have the opportunity to get their ballot back and say, this is potentially a mistake or a problem. And the thing that I have seen in person, and I brought this up at the last meeting, is people basically hate ranking candidates by saying, here's 1, 2, 3, 29, 30. This is who I want, and this is who I like the least. And if you allow skipped rankings, then that 29-30 becomes 4-5, and becomes preferential over all of the other candidates. And that's an education concern. But even with good education, there's still I think a sort of innate desire to rank somebody you hate last.
Never underestimate the power of spite.
Yeah. It's just something that I think comes with this whole thing. So,
if you want, I can read you all of the voter notifications based on ballot scenario.
Are people interested in that? I'm more concerned at the moment with the voter not being present when the ballot is processed, because, it sounds like there's a lot of good notification if the voter is right there and they have the opportunity for a spoiled ballot. But yep. I'm at the moment mostly concerned about the mail-in and absentee stuff.
So what options do we have? I mean, we could put a note in the instructions to not vote for candidates that you don't want to win.
Yeah. Yep. We can do voter education right in the blurb, as much or as little as we feel like is important. The immediate decision, obviously in light of our ability to do voter education, is whether to exhaust any skipped rankings or allow all skipped rankings. It's an all or nothing thing. And in the absence of that threshold, I think I would lean towards exhausting them.
I think that's what we talked about last time. I'm looking at the notes.
Can I just ask a point of for clarification? So say someone does hate vote someone in 25th place and they only voted for 3 people in 1, 2, and 3. And their ballot gets exhausted because they have too many skipped ranks. Those first 3 rankings will still count, won't they?
Yes.
So yeah, okay. That makes me much more comfortable then. Yeah.
What that means tangibly is that vote for the 25th rank will not count at all.
Right, which is probably the voter's intent.
Probably.
Right.
Whereas with this option not selected, that vote for the 25th would count for their 4th place vote.
Yeah, which
doesn't sound right.
Yeah, it's not great.
I mean, I think if those end up being our options, then yes, I'd prefer to have that ballot be exhausted after, in that case, the 3rd choice.
Exhausted doesn't mean discarded.
No, it just means it doesn't count moving forward.
Right.
Yeah.
And you got to figure in most races where you've got, so it's a municipal election. I don't know, maybe there's 5 people running for mayor or whatever. Hopefully if not your first, if not your second, hopefully your 3rd choice would at least be one of the final ones.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So if we did that, if at the polls, if the person is there, could a message still come up that there's an error and you can revote? I mean, can you have both? Jeff?
It's 2 separate times. So the notification at the tabulator would occur while the person's putting their ballot through.
Right.
What we're talking about with exhausting ballots is happening at the end on the software when we're actually tallying the results.
I think that's yes. It could.
So yes, it is. Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
The only issue would be, like this wouldn't be something we actually have to worry about, except for when people mail in their ballots, because then they don't get that feedback at the tabulator.
Exactly.
Yep.
In that case, I would certainly lean towards enabling this setting that says assign skipped rankings to the set of exhausted ballots, which would basically exhaust ballots with exhaust rankings that have previous skipped ones. With a note that I think this committee, after our discussion last week, was really into the sort of main model, and if that could be incorporated into the software, I think we would use that option to have a single skipped rank simply be ignored. So if that's, I mean, I don't think that the city has thousands of dollars to fund to fund development of that particular feature, but if it's something that could be added to the software.
So that's where your annual licensing fees cover that. So if down the road someone somewhere else pays and gets that added into the software, then it becomes available to you as part of an upgrade.
I see.
Or if Massachusetts as a whole decides to go ranked choice voting and they pay for that modification, now you have the access to it through an upgrade, as long as you're paying those annual licensing fees.
Okay.
Well, I was about to say, it's officially on the ballot now, and I do believe that the language they submitted includes this same main style skipped ranking thing. So
yep.
That may in fact come to pass. I'm hoping that it does.
There you go.
So
this is also something that I wouldn't hesitate to write into the ordinance conditionally. Basically saying, if using software that is able to discriminate, distinguish this threshold, then it should do so. If the software does not, then this is what you do. And that way, the ordinance wouldn't even need to be updated if the software was updated. So that comes more into the ordinance writing than figuring out the exact profile. But yeah, Owen?
I mean, I'm just wondering if we could do that, because I think at the basis of this all, the ordinance kind of indicates kind of our rules and around it, so that I would think we'd have to decide on one or the other, and then we can amend it later on. But maybe I'm off here. But I think that because people then could say, well, I skipped a rank, but if we were using this software, these ranks would count and it wouldn't become exhausted. I'm not sure how. Tom, do you have any thoughts about that?
There's definitely legislation out there in the world that basically reads, if doing this were to become legal, then we'll do it. So maybe I'd probably want to run it by the solicitor. But like I've seen that before, where there's been legislation saying like, hey, if the federal government ever allows us to do this thing, then this is how it will be done. Stuff like that. So yeah, maybe if we're gonna have eventually a list of questions for the solicitor, that's one I'd probably include. I'm not opposed to it, because I do think that this might resolve itself rather quickly if Massachusetts does end up voting to adopt ranked choice voting in the fall. But maybe that's something we can. We don't need to decide that tonight.
Right. That argument actually swayed me a little bit, because I don't like the idea of somebody pointing to their specific ballot and saying, hey, if we had used different software, this would have counted differently. But I also think that we could probably creatively come up with an ordinance that we were comfortable with, that was very clear about, we could tie it to specific version numbers of software. We can be as specific as we want to or need to be in order for to feel comfortable that people are fully on board with what's happening or what decisions are being made. So, cool. Okay. So that basically brings us to the end of the additional questions that we had. I'm going to just share this guy. Share. Which is sort of like our updated status of the profiles, or the profile. Really the only difference that I added was this guy down here, the assign skip rankings to set of exhausted ballots. I think this is a good moment for if anybody has lingering questions about these settings for the official profile, we should dig into them. I'm not totally sure that I do. I know we had a pretty long discussion about the elimination type, batch versus single and tied versus single. And we had come up with single and tied, but I don't know if people still had any sort of lingering stuff about that. The previous round elimination methods we talked about, but I think there was some. I'm remembering that there was some question about sort of what other communities that are using this software, what's sort of normal, and that Jeff might have some sort of insight into standards on these things, and like if are you seeing other places using backwards from previous round elimination more than they are in terms of none, or forward from first round elimination?
There's really nothing standard. That's why all the options exist. I mean, it's again, byproduct of development, right? Someone makes a request for something, they're willing to pay for the software development, and it gets added. So you see it all over the place. And that's really why I wanted to have these meetings and go through all the options to make sure when you're writing all of this up that you know exactly what your options are. Right.
Yeah, I think we're very much on the same page there. So I guess that brings me to two things. And the first one I'll ask is, do you have any kind of an estimate what that software development cost would be? Just for the sake of, considering, like, what do you think it would be to add that skip one skip ranking? Are we talking a couple $100? Are we talking a couple $1,000? Like what's the ballpark there?
It would be thousands. I don't know how many thousands.
Okay. So that's,
I've been trying to get an answer on that, but I have 3 other things in the development queue right now. So unfortunately, this is kind of taking a backseat to some more pressing issues.
Yep.
I do have one of our reps kind of pushing them to get me a ballpark number, basically, so I can give you guys an area of what it might look like.
Okay.
But as of right now, I don't have anything.
Okay. It's unlikely that we would be paying thousands of dollars for this, I think. And I don't know if people feel differently about that, but
yeah. I just have one, looking this over, I'm just trying to, for the purpose of our ordinance, like, I'm just trying to look at these and figure out which ones have a potential to actually affect the outcome of the race and which ones don't.
Yep.
Because that actually might determine which ones we actually write to. So for example, whether you do single and tied, or batch elimination doesn't actually affect the outcome doesn't have any chance of affecting the outcome of the race, right?
Correct.
Okay, so should we even write to that?
Well, I don't think we need to write it if it doesn't affect the outcome of the race.
Right. No, you're right. That doesn't mean that we can't have an opinion on it.
I'm sort of outlining the ones here. Can you guys see? I'm sort of putting red around the ones that could have an effect, right?
Right.
That one. And that one. Am I missing any here? Elimination type shouldn't affect the result. The votes to include in threshold calculation, that would definitely affect the result if it was multi-winner, but in single winner, I don't think it's going to affect the result. Exclude unresolved write-ins.
That actually, how we handle write-ins should be in the ordinance.
Yeah. It could theoretically, but yeah. Declare winner by threshold is not going to matter for single winner or not. Uses precincts can matter in multi-winner, but it wouldn't matter in single winner. Pause after round doesn't. Perform elimination transfer in last round doesn't. That's, I think we determined as sort of a presentational thing.
Right.
And then use first round suspension doesn't. So I think we're looking at,
There's really 6 parameters that we need to write to.
I mean, we can make this like it matters if it's multi-winner,
Right. Right. And I guess some of that might someday matter, depending on how we go with any of that.
I think that's all of it. All right. So in that case, let me just pull this up. Well, our next thing on the agenda is finalize our CV profile settings if we're ready to vote. Otherwise, identify remaining questions. And before making a determination on that, what do y'all think? Are we ready to vote on this?
I feel fairly ready to vote on it. I think, should we take it one parameter at a time?
We could, or we could just kind of do it as a slate. Just kind of say, or we could say we're voting on all of the red ones, or we're voting on the whole thing, for a.
Or we don't even actually have to vote on it tonight. We really could just use this information to actually write
the ordinance. Yeah.
And then vote on that ordinance. That might make more sense.
Yeah, you're right. We don't have to vote on this as is. We're basically just going to have to vote on the ordinance. So did you have a hand?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say I wanted to kind of try to digest this a little bit more too. If there was if it wasn't super time sensitive, I just wanted to really look this all over.
Okay. Yep. I think that's good. Are there while we have Jeff here on the line, is there anything that stands out to people that you want to clarify or dig into around any of this stuff before we move on?
I guess I would ask Jeff, is there anything that could affect the outcome of a race that's not on this screen? I assume no, but okay.
Or I should say that's not outlined in red on the screen. Yeah. Yeah.
No, you guys have got it pretty much down there.
Right.
Cool. All right. Well, in that case, I'm happy to not vote on this. This doesn't need to be voted on, and we can just kind of use this as a guide to do our ordinance stuff. So, in that case, Jeff, you're absolutely welcome to stick around if you want to, but if you want to jet, you can. I just want to thank you for coming in and making yourself available for all this, because it's very, very helpful.
And any time, obviously, here for you guys. And if you could send me that screenshot with the choices you made,
Yep.
we can talk about putting together some ballots, having you guys fill them out like we did for Amherst, have you send them back to me. I can process them internally, put it through the software, generate all the reports with the images, and let you guys kind of compare how these settings come out and how they play out round by round versus what you were anticipating seeing based on the way you marked the ballots.
Great. Yeah, I'll send this to you right after the meeting.
All right, excellent.
Cool.
All right, until next time, everybody, take care.
All right.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, great. Moving along. Discussion of ordinance progress, translating profile settings into ordinance language. So we already have sort of a subcommittee-ish thing, which is, I think, me, is it me, Tom, and Owen? Was that, am I right on that?
Believe so.
As in a non-quorum of people who can be working on this. So I think we all have access to the document. Do we want to just have that be loose, or do we want to have some sort of a more framework of how we're gonna move forward working on that? I mean, I think it would be nice to get this document kind of translated into, I don't think it's going to be a lot of work, but translated into ordinance stuff by the next meeting so that we can look at it as a committee.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, that, if you don't finish it in the subcommittee, at least bring it to the meeting so we can say, hey, that's really, no one thought of that.
Right.
Unlikely, but.
Right.
Yeah, and I do think you really, I mean, this is all really complicated to me. So I think when you're working on the ordinance, just please try to make it as user-friendly as possible.
Oh, yeah.
You understand this, but I don't understand most of it in the normal. So just keep that in mind.
Yep.
And I'm good at editing, so as Owen, I think, knows.
Yes, I could 100% vouch for that. Thank you.
But the simpler things are said, the better.
Yes. I think plain language and examples where necessary and stuff like that is going to be, yeah, simple and not also as short as possible too. I think.
And as non-technical as it can be. And, yeah.
So do you, Dan, would you and Tom then want to try to meet to try to hash out the ordinance so we can present it at the next meeting?
I think that's a good idea, and we can if you guys both think that that's a good idea to have at least one meeting before our next committee meeting, we can figure that out offline after this meeting. But I don't think that's a bad idea.
I think it's a
we
good
all have
idea.
access to the document. We can all comment on it. We can all move language around or whatever. And then having sort of one mini meeting before then, I think is a good idea.
Oh, that's how you've been operating with the document?
Well, we haven't yet. That's just, it's just that this is the start of that. So, yeah.
Cool.
This is.
So, remind me what else we have to do beyond the ordinance. We're going to have to do some sort of logistics and setting it up as a committee, or is that something the clerk's office does?
Well, there's budget. There's budgets.
Budget, and then education. Yeah, okay.
And then public outreach and education stuff.
Okay.
So, but we I mean, I think we sort of thought the ordinance was kind of the first good.
Well, for sure.
Post. And then I do have one other thing on the agenda here about funding and education stuff. But we talked a little bit at the last meeting about the how this is paid for, at least in terms of the fees, to LHS, which is Tom brought up the possibility that free cash might be able to cover the initial fee, and then that clerk's office would probably have the $800 licensing fee as part of the regular ongoing budget. But I did want to kind of bring up, like, if there's something as a committee we need to do or present to the city council, or do a budget request or whatever, because I just don't know how that works. So I think it's a good question.
Well, if the $8,000 or whatever, that's going to be done separately, that would be an appropriation to the council. Have to discuss it with the mayor and the auditor. And I would say in the fall would probably be good, because that's when free cash becomes available. And this is going to be a tough year.
Right.
Going to be a lot of other priorities, but the fall is October-ish is when free cash usually is certified.
Okay. So is that just a letter that we kind of write to the mayor and the city council that says? Well,
it starts. Yeah, I mean, you have to have your proposal together, and then, I mean, I can do the paperwork, but the mayor, it always came from the mayor's office. Now it kind of comes from, through different places. But I think on this situation, it should definitely be run past her.
Okay. Because I'm happy to write a thing that covers that or whatever.
Yeah, it would be like a memo, and then also with, of course, documentation from LHS saying how much it is and what it's going to cover, and all that stuff.
Okay.
Because then you have to go to the finance committee and explain it and do all that.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to get the ball rolling on that, specifically for the licensing fees, for the first year and for the ongoing year fees. Not any sort of, we can do additional budget requests for other expenditures that we might want to do in terms of education or events or anything like that.
Yeah.
I feel like
I would probably ask maybe tonight when you send this to Jeff, if he could put together a proposal of how much the initial costs are.
Yeah.
The licensing fee, is it paid the first year? Is it not paid the first year?
Oh, we confirmed that with him. It's a total of $8,000 the first year and a total of $800 subsequent years.
Yeah, and I would want it to be clarified, like when the subsequent year, like when is it?
Starts. Yeah.
Yes, like calendar years, fiscal years, whatever.
Right.
I will get that in document form from Jeff so that we can get that going. Okay,
once
cool.
we do
I'll run that by other committee members on email, and then individually, if people have feedback about that, they can reply to me and not to the whole group. So we can sort of.
And once we have that, the quote, I might suggest actually just forwarding that to the mayor, just so that no surprises later on.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, especially with the way things are right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Cool. All right. So me, Tom, and Owen are going to follow up offline and figure out when to have a check-in before our next meeting. The last thing on my agenda I added was the formation of a possible outreach or education subcommittee. To I don't know if we're there yet or if there's interest, but it might be nice to sort of start brainstorming that stuff in a non-open meeting sort of way between a couple people that could then be presented back to the committee. Does anyone feel sort of inspired or interested in that stuff? Or I'm definitely interested in working on that stuff.
Yeah, I think that I would like to do that as well.
Cool.
I would as well.
Cool. Okay. So maybe me, Chris, and Sarah, can think about putting some stuff together.
Yeah, that works for me. But we do have a seventh member. I wasn't here at the beginning of the meeting, but do we know what their status is? Are they just not able to do Zoom?
I have not heard anything from her.
Yeah, we're not entirely sure, but we think that maybe email might not be the most regular.
I mean, I can send her a text. I send her a text and I haven't heard anything. She's not very good at email, so I don't know.
It may be the case where she was all very game to do in-person meetings, and that this has just kind of thrown a loop in that and made it.
That's fair
for her to participate. But I'll try and reach out to her too, just as the chair of the committee, and see if we can get a read on it. But we do have a quorum. We have people here, and I don't really want to hold things up.
Yeah, you're right. No, I was just concerned that maybe she'd want to participate in that, but you're totally right.
And we can adjust this. This isn't super official.
Sure.
Obviously we can't have 4 people working offline on this at a time. But if she wants to be involved in an element of that, I think we as a committee will be able to accommodate that. So
you're right.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I'm excited about that, and we'll talk more about that. I added funding estimate on there just because, personally, having done some outreach and talking to especially seniors in the community who really want to be notified of things, who really want to feel like they're included and up to date on information and it's really gone over. I would love to find funding to do a direct mail to everyone in the city. Not this year, but like in advance of the first RCV election, whenever that ends up being. And whether that's a letter in an envelope or it's a EDDM, which is every door direct mail, sort of a flyer or something, that's officially from the city. It's not private advocacy or anything like that. It's just voter information.
I think that we asked this question and I don't remember the answer. Are we allowed to piggyback on the city census, Barb?
You can. You have to pay for all the inserts, have to get them to LHS, who does our census, and have it, and they would put it in. There usually is a charge for it.
It would be cheaper than a new mailing, though, for sure.
Could be.
Postage-wise, I can't imagine it would be. It wouldn't be more efficient to group it with the existing mail.
People are less likely to ignore the census, I think, than some random envelope.
That's true.
I don't know about that.
But that's also true.
I see at least a couple people that I don't hear from usually for the census.
Usually takes me, I'm very, very late usually. So I know that I'm veering into territory that the subcommittee should handle, but I just have one question that comes to mind, and I know that we're not allowed to put things in people's mailboxes that aren't mailed, right? Because that's government property. But for the purposes of getting information, could we just get volunteers to walk this around to all the addresses in the city?
You say just get volunteers, Chris.
I know.
Don't just get volunteers.
I know, but it would be infinitely cheaper. It'd be free, essentially. It'd be 5 cents a page. I know, but that is
the question: would we be allowed to do that? Are we allowed to go door to door?
You can get a lot of doors. The problem is, like people with gates. You know about the gates, Chris.
I know.
Apartment complexes. I guess like the Hamptons doesn't like letting people in. So there's some complication.
I guess my question wasn't are we allowed, but is it since this is an actual official city thing, is it too gauche? Is the word maybe I'm looking for? Is it too is it too weird?
I don't want to take anything off the table, but I actually really like the city census idea.
Okay.
Just to see what that would actually cost, because it might be if that's not going to be a whole lot more than like the cost of printing the things and putting them in envelopes. I mean, that actually might be like a really straightforward way to do that.
Well, I'm already going to be contacting Jeff to get a document for the licensing fees. So I can,
Right.
at the same time, I'm going to ask him for a quote on what that would be.
Yeah, so thing you have to remember about the census is it would have to be ready to go like the very first week in December.
Okay.
And it has to be sent to LHS where they send it to their mailing house and they stuff it in. And whether there's a cost for one, if we provide them, I'm not sure. And it would have to make sure that it doesn't increase the weight of the mailing anymore.
Did we
that's very early. December's. Oh, when does the census go out though, Barbara?
Well, I usually like it to go out right after the first of the year, but they have to have it by the beginning of December because LHS does a ton of census, and we're actually very lucky that we still can get them. But no, so it has to be. It would have to be ready the first. I would plan on the beginning of December.
Is it going to be less effective if it's that far in advance of the?
That's what I'm worried about too. It might be a good first shot though.
Yep.
If it's particularly cheap,
So I know from having done this in other capacities that for roughly $4,000, you can send a flyer, a big color printed, double-sided.
Does that include printing and postage, or just?
Yes, printing and postage. Yep. And there might be ways to lower that a little bit, but call it roughly $4 or $5 grand. You can get a piece of mail to every address.
Yeah, so about the same time as the census, so around December is when we'd be working on budgets. So like if that was going to go into, I don't know, my budget or some budget for the fiscal 22, you'd need to be thinking about it then.
Okay.
Yep.
That's great to know.
I think that some of this should be planned to be put in for a request for the 2022 budget.
So you said that would go for the 2022 budget would go in this December?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
So they work on it and they get it to, so December or so is when the budgets are being done by the departments.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely going to get a quote from Jeff, and I may put together my own quote for a possible EDDM mailer, just so we can compare it. Maybe we do both. Maybe we have some detailed voter information that goes out with the census.
What's up, hon? I'm in a meeting.
If it goes out in the census, though, it would be out in this current census year, which that's how the budget's already. I mean, I've got the budget for the census.
I see.
So I would just need to know if we provide the insert, does it cost extra to do a one-page insert with the census?
Right.
But then we'd also have to pay to have it printed and pay to get it to their shipping house.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I thought I was on mute. But
that's okay.
I guess another question comes to mind. Does the city do anything in the spring or fall? Some sort of mailing, or is the census the only thing? The census is the only thing that comes to mind for me.
Well,
there's taxes. There's the excise tax.
I don't know if we want to piggyback on that, though.
There's that thing from the water department.
Oh, the water quality report?
Yeah.
Oh.
An envelope, though.
No, you're right. It's a flyer.
Well,
you could send it. Could you have an insert in absentee ballots?
No, are you kidding? No, we're not putting anything else in absentee ballot.
Okay.
You will soon find that out.
Yeah, well,
no,
it'll be fun.
I do have my contact at LHS who does the census, so I can ask him about that tomorrow.
Oh, cool. Okay. Awesome. All right. Any other thoughts about that? Me, Chris, and Sarah will find a way to communicate, maybe just email. Any new business from anybody? No. So our next meeting date, based on what we have been doing, is the third Thursday. So that would be August 20th at 6 p.m.
Sounds good to me.
Does everyone like that? Cool. August 20th, 6 p.m. We're still going to be on Zoom until you hear otherwise.
I may or may not be able to make it.
Okay. If you let us know enough in advance that you can't, we can try and work around your schedule.
Yeah, it's going to be only 2 days before the start of early voting for me. I'll try, but.
Okay.
Would it be helpful to you to move it up like a week?
To have it be the 13th of August?
Yeah, to get that away from the start of early voting.
I think the best date for me would be September 17th. No, I think there's not going to be a good day for me until after the primary.
Yeah.
So,
That's okay. And if you're unable to make a meeting, that's
yeah, I just have to do the best I can.
We'll do.
I could do the 13th as well, though. If Sarah definitely could do the 13th.
I can do the 13th.
Okay.
I'm just going to be visiting my mom and may or may not have internet.
Let's do the 13th. That's about a month from now anyway, because today's only the 16th. So
6:30, right?
Huh? 6:30? No, 6 p.m. 6 p.m.
I'm going to do what I'm doing right now, Chris, which is to put a reminder in your phone.
So here's what happened. I actually did put a reminder for 6 p.m. and then I logged into the Zoom and it said meeting starts at 6:30. So I'm sitting here twiddling my thumbs and passing time. Owen messages me and says, you do an RCV? And I'm like, yeah. And then I'm twiddling my thumbs, and then whenever I came on is when I realized I was waiting for the wrong stupid meeting to start. And so, but when I sat down, I'm like, well, why did I write 6 in my phone? It was annoying on my end. It was all my fault.
I may or may not have been eating dinner when the reminder rang to get me.
Tom and I had a meeting about this very problem just a couple hours ago today.
True.
So maybe it'll be better someday. That would be cool.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, the city actually may have funding to improve this process. So that's money looking for a problem as opposed to everything else in the world that's looking for money. So, all right. If we have no new business, do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay. And we have to vote on it one at a time, which is really cool because those are the new rules, I guess. But so I'll just call your name. Sarah?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Barbara?
Aye.
And Chris?
Aye.
And I vote aye. We are adjourned.
Goodbye.
Cool. Bye, everyone.
Stay well.
Have a good evening.